This is Look West, a podcast from California's Assembly Democrats.
There's a new voice for California's Central Coast. Hi, I'm Emily Weber with Look West. Earlier this year, 10 members of the state legislature joined together to form the Central Coast Legislative Caucus.
It's a group of legislators that come together, I think, with common values and common goals. In this case, it's really uplifting the voice of the Central Coast.
That's Dawn Addis, chair of the CCLC. More from her in a moment. Each of the members of the Central Coast Legislative Caucus have deep personal connections to the Central Coast, including Gail Pellerin from Santa Cruz County.
Oh my gosh. I remember going to the beach as a kid and enjoying the ocean and being out there in the sun and the sand. And certainly when I went to college at Cal Poly, we would go to Avila Beach where there were swings on the beach. And just to relieve stress, we'd get on those swings and swing and just stare out in the ocean, and really helped a lot.
Steve Bennett represents Ventura County.
There are very few places in the world that have a Mediterranean climate, a coastal Mediterranean climate. And this is one of those places. And that's what makes it so precious and so important that we protect it.
Greg Hart, who represents part of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties, says the issues that are important to the CCLC are important to all of California.
Sea level rise is something that's an urgent issue for our districts, and we all are united in trying to do our best to protect the natural resources in the urban areas from the threats of sea level rise. But we also have, the vibrant agriculture. We grow the food that feeds the world, and that's a critically important industry in our part of the state of California. And then we have tourism as well. So we have all of the pieces that all the other parts of the state of California have in our sliver along the coast. And the issues are the same everywhere.
We'll hear more from Assembly members Hart, Bennett, and Pellerin right after we hear from the CCLC Chair Dawn Addis. Look West producer Dawn Andrews sat down with her in Morro Bay.
The Central Coast includes 5 counties in California. You have Ventura, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Monterey, and Santa Cruz. And this long stretch of beautiful coastline is sometimes overlooked. When people think of California, they often think of the glitz and glamour of Hollywood and Los Angeles, or the high-tech hub that is the Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay region. Now, politically, the Central Coast has also sometimes been overlooked. For decades, California's political leaders have come from Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, but that's changing. Just this month, a man named Robert Rivas, who represents part of the Central Coast, was elected Speaker of the Assembly, a top political post in the state that is the 4th largest economy in the world. And also this year, the Central Coast Legislative Caucus was formed, a group of 10 lawmakers. And the leader of that group is a woman who has been an advocate for Central Coast communities for a long time now. She is the Assembly member for Morro Bay. She is Dawn Addis. Hi, Dawn. Thanks for being on Look West.
Thanks for having me, Dawn.
Really appreciate you being here today. This is a lovely spot to visit.
I feel so fortunate every time I come down here to Tidelands Park in specific, because we have families around. You can see the rock. The weather's amazing.
It really, really is. If you don't mind, we'd like to learn a little bit more about you,
Absolutely.
the Central Coast, and of course the Central Coast Legislative Caucus. If it's okay, I'd like to start with you. What's your first memory of this beautiful place?
The first time I came here was the summer we decided to move here. So we decided to move to Morro Bay sight unseen. My husband wanted to go back to school to get his degree, and we had an infant, and so I decided I better go see that place that we're going to move to. And I remember driving around with our son, and it felt like a place that I could relate to. It was very working class. You could come here, make a living, be in a beautiful place, access nature very, very quickly. There's sea otters, there's the ocean right here, but we also have a very robust fishing community in Morro Bay, and so we contribute quite a bit to the tables, right, to people's dinner tables, and just felt like a community that would welcome a young and growing family.
A little bit of history about yourself. Tell us about the journey that brought you to the state legislature.
Yeah, so I have always had a heart for public service. I started as a classroom teacher. I actually decided to be a classroom teacher when I was 12 years old. I knew some students who were served through the special education program at my middle school, and I saw how they were treated at the time. I would say students at that time were far less included if they were in special education programs. And at 12, I had this sort of sense of like, oh, I could do that better. I could be a better teacher for them. I could be more inclusive. I could make sure these kiddos were part of the fabric of the school community. And so that set my lifelong journey of public service. And then in 2016, became a community organizer here on the Central Coast, founded the Women's March. And we had 10,000 people come out. It was a huge endeavor, and thought, okay, we planned the march, we've gotten in the streets, we've said what we had to say, now I'm going to go back to my regular life. But what happened, Dawn, is people started writing to us and saying, that was the most hope that I've had in months, or I've been alone on my couch. I didn't think anybody could hear me. And I came out to this event and found people all around me who are working for change and who believe in a better future for us. And so we kept organizing. And so I stayed in community organizing for, I'd say, until I got elected to the assembly. But in that time, got involved in local issues, city issues. We had a huge water reclamation project that was very important. As you know, California faces historic droughts. We're finally out of it for the moment. We're all happy for now, but we knew that we needed a long-term source of clean water for our community. So I got engaged at the city level, and then was actually asked, was recruited to run by Close the Gap. Many of your listeners are familiar with Close the Gap, that recruits women for the state legislature. So ran in 2020, didn't win, redistricting, ran again, and now I get to represent 20% of California's coast. So 3 of the counties in the Central Coast Caucus I have the honor of representing.
Wow. So it sounds to me like you not only inspired others with your Women's March and the activism here in the community, but you also got inspired by them.
Very much so. And what's been so neat to see is, we've since closed Women's March San Luis Obispo down. We were a nonprofit. We've closed that down because each of the organizers has gone on to other things. But what's been amazing to see and is inspiring to me is that community groups across the county have sprung up. And so when the Women's March happened, it was sort of very slow specific, sort of county seat specific or centric. And now there's groups all across San Luis Obispo County that have been inspired and are leading change. So that's been really neat to see.
You mentioned that you represent 3 of the 5 counties that make up the Central Coast. Can you describe what part of the Central Coast is yours?
Yes, we
represent?
can. I always say to people, let's play tourist for a moment.
Sure.
And if we're going to start in the north, we would start at the Santa Cruz Harbor, on the south side of the Santa Cruz Harbor. We would travel down Highway 1, maybe get a little wine in the hills of Aptos, past Moss Landing, where there's a very famous 2 stacks power plant, different from the Morro Bay 3 stacks. But you'd go all the way around the Monterey Bay, go to the old Fisherman's Wharf in Monterey. If Big Sur was open right now, you would travel down the entire coast of Big Sur, Hearst Castle, Cambria. You could go inland and get more wine in Paso. We've also got a Atascadero Bubblegum Alley for people who have visited that space in San Luis Obispo. And then, you could see Morro Rock, Pismo Pier, strawberries, as you mentioned, in Arroyo Grande, and then go all the way to Grover Beach and all the way inland, actually, to the San Luis Obispo County line. So the only place I don't represent in San Luis Obispo is the Oceano Dunes in Nipomo. And then in Monterey and Santa Cruz, we really hug the coast.
So let's talk a little bit about your work in the state legislature. You've formed the Central Coast Legislative Caucus. First of all, for those who aren't familiar with the political process, what is a caucus?
Well, it's a group of legislators that come together, I think, with common values and common goals. In this case, it's really uplifting the voice of the Central Coast and, finding commonality where I would say we're all Democrats, but we're a diverse group of Democrats from Santa Cruz to Ventura. And some of the members of the caucus don't actually touch the coast, but they do represent parts of those counties that make up the Central Coast. And so that's a really positive thing because we can have discussions and really come to consensus or agreement or collaborate around what ties us together between more inland communities and more coastal communities, which is incredibly important for this region.
So the purpose of the caucus is to improve the understanding of what's here, as well as to advocate for the issues that might be affecting the coast as well.
Exactly.
As a group.
Very, very smart way to say that.
Having the Speaker of the State Assembly, a member of your caucus, has got to add a little heft to your new group.
Well, we are so proud of Speaker Rivas. I mean, he is barrier breaking in so many ways. To have someone from the Central Coast, to have someone from his background, a farm working background, to have someone who understands coastal and more inland rural issues, agricultural issues, but really has the heart that he does for the entire legislative body. It's a huge honor for us.
So the Central Coast Legislative Caucus, as you mentioned, is in 10 different people. You all must have specific priorities for your own communities. Does the caucus also have its own top priorities?
So far we have advocated on a couple of issues, getting money back in for coastal resiliency, and some of that money did come back in through the budget process. And then we did write a letter advocating for Highway 101 funding. And we took the perspective that Highway 101, anywhere along the Central Coast that Highway 101 runs through, any project in any area affects the entire Central Coast, because if traffic gets backed up somewhere, people, can't get to that other beautiful place that they're going. And so we really tried to advocate as a body. And then we're starting to take a look at, the issue with fire insurance. That's an issue that's incredibly important across the entire district.
Yeah, between the drought and wildfires, that's certainly been an issue along the Central Coast
Yes.
here over the last decade or so.
Yeah, exactly.
Coastal resiliency means what? You mentioned that's
Yeah,
one of the things
that's a really good question. A lot of this came out of the January and March storms, where we saw much of Big Sur. I'll just speak to my district in particular. Much of Big Sur having massive landslides. It's still closed months later because of the road work that needs to be done. We saw the Capitola Pier get hit incredibly hard. Seacliff Beach got hit. We had communities. I visited 20 different locations during those storms. And, some of what we saw was creek overruns, right? Historic levels of water, but also issues that we're going to need to solve around, keeping those creeks cleared and coming to the ocean. And so some of it is just sort of infrastructure that we need to deal with. Keeping roads open is part of coastal resiliency. Some of it is making sure that we are investing in ways that help the actual coastline. There's natural ways to help the coastline. Like, for instance, we have legislation that set targets to increase kelp and oyster beds and eelgrass, and that kelp can act as sort of a natural hardener for the coast so that there's not so much erosion. So coastal resiliency is a pretty broad sort of set of issues that we look at.
And beach erosion is a very real thing from what I
Very
understand.
real, yes.
One of your predecessors had a hearing that was slammed with people. Hundreds of people
Yes.
showed up to talk just about the sand disappearing from the beaches.
Yes, exactly. And you can see it in real time happening. I mean, we certainly saw video after video of beaches being eroded and cliffs coming down during those storms.
Are the issues that are facing the Central Coast, are they the same as the rest of California, or can the people of San Francisco or perhaps the North State just ignore your pleas?
No, I think in a lot of ways, the Central Coast, because it's largely undeveloped in many ways, can be a little bit of a canary in the coal mine where you can see some of these things happening in real time, especially when we talk about the effects of climate climate change. And I think that resonates in particular across the whole state for coastal communities across the whole state, but also more inland communities across the whole state. The fire insurance issue that we'll be advocating on, infrastructure around the Highway 101 corridor, which goes up and down the entire state. I do think those kinds of things resonate across our entire body.
So if I can just focus for a moment again on one of the difficulties that the Central Coast is facing, I believe it was Speaker Rivas who mentioned that some 80% of the creeks and waterways in Central Coast area, particularly his district I guess he was referring to, are polluted in some level or another. How big of a problem is the drinking water issue here on the Central Coast?
The biggest issue, and I'll speak to my district, the biggest issue is lack of water, right?
Okay.
And so looking at ways to increase water. So when I was in local gov, that's why we invested in the water reclamation project. The Monterey Peninsula has some projects going. SoCal just finished a water reclamation project. Los Osos, needs more water. So there's a lot of small towns and unincorporated areas that are working on innovative solutions for bringing more drinking water to the district, and of course you need it for other areas as well.
So you're a relatively new member of the state legislature, but you've been an advocate and an activist in the Central Coast communities for quite some time now. Struggled over the last few years with some of, as you mentioned, the floods and droughts and wildfires. But are you hopeful for the future of the Central Coast of California?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people have lived in areas like the Central Coast for, thousands and thousands of years. And what I have seen time and again is, we come together as a community to address the issues. What I see a lot of is there's a lot of innovative thinking across the Central Coast. We've got a number of universities, state and UCs, between CSUMB and Cal Poly, which are both in my district. You've got UC Santa Barbara, Channel Islands, there's a number, and then UC Santa Cruz. So there's a lot of innovative thinking and people coming out of the universities looking to help solve the problems that we've faced since I've been in the legislature and when I was on council.
Before we let you go, let me ask you a little bit about wine. I have some friends in Sonoma, and no offense to the people of Napa, but my friends have a bumper sticker that says, Sonoma makes wine, Napa makes auto parts. It's kind of a regional dispute, if you will,
yeah.
and all in good fun.
Yes.
They both make substantially great wines.
Yes.
Are the Central Coast wine industry, is that now competing at a level with the folks from what we call wine country?
I would say absolutely. I will just add this caveat that I think there are enough wine drinkers for all of the wine regions of California.
That makes sense. Do you have a favorite?
I'll refrain.
You're not going to pick one because you want to make sure you get to visit all.
Exactly. They're all no, but I mean, I've been so impressed with, whether it's some of the larger sort of standards that you might be able to pick up at the grocery store, or they're folks that, have invested as a second career into being winemakers or growing grapes. It's really been interesting to see the love that people have across the entire district of being a part of that industry, because they see that industry as sort of part of the fabric of the community of the Central Coast.
Wonderful. Assemblymember Dawn Addis, thank you very much. Chair of the Central Coast Legislative Caucus. We at Look West really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Absolutely, and welcome down from Sacramento. You picked a good day to come down.
It is beautiful. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Assembly Democrats make up the majority of the CCLC. As we told you earlier in the podcast, producer Don Andrews also talked with a few of them to find out more about their connection to the Central Coast. He started with Gail Pellerin.
Assemblymember Pellerin, what part of the Central Coast do you represent?
I represent Santa Cruz County, so basically the harbor north of to the county line, and then I go over to Santa Clara County as well.
What's your first memory or fondest memory of the Central Coast?
Oh my gosh. I remember going to the beach as a kid and enjoying the ocean and being out there in the sun and the sand. And certainly when I went to college at Cal Poly, we would go to Avila Beach where there were swings on the beach. And just to relieve stress, we'd get on those swings and swing and just stare out in the ocean, and really helped a lot.
So the Central Coast is sometimes overlooked with the Hollywood glamour of Los Angeles and the Silicon Valley of San Francisco. People shouldn't overlook it. It's grand vistas, great agriculture, etc. You have a chance here to tell the world why they should come to the Central Coast. What do you tell them?
Yeah, no, it's beautiful, beautiful part of the state. You could be in the redwoods doing amazing hikes, and certainly the coastal redwoods are very unique to Santa Cruz County. We got beautiful state parks, and then you could spend your day on the beach enjoying the ocean and walks along West Cliff, and it's just got great seafood, and the vibe is very chill, and people just seem to be out there having a good time, enjoying the sunshine, walking, biking, hiking, doing all those great outdoor activities.
Speaking of the CCLC, this caucus was just formed this year. What are the priorities? What do you hope to accomplish with the caucus?
Well, certainly we saw what Mother Nature can do this last winter, where the coast was just pummeled with atmospheric river after atmospheric river, and just sustained substantial damage to our coastline and piers and infrastructure. And then, of course, inland as well, especially in our San Lorenzo Valley. The roads were washed out and people didn't have access. And and this region's been hit by disasters. We've had the wildfires, we've now had the floods, and we've had the destruction through the rain. And so, we are working hard as a caucus to make sure that we are getting our share in the budget. We need to make sure we have coastal resiliency. We're studying sea level rise. We're protecting our environment. And on the forestry side, we need to make sure we're doing forestry management so we don't have that biofuel sitting on the ground ready to ignite the next fire.
Heading south down the Central Coast, you'll find Assemblymember Greg Hart's district. He was in his Capitol office when Dawn stopped in to visit him.
What part of the Central Coast are you representing?
The 37th Assembly District has Santa Barbara County and South San Luis Obispo County. So really a gorgeous part of California, a coastal district, but also has wonderful assets inland, agricultural, mountains, national forest, and beautiful sunshine. Even the Channel Islands, Santa Barbara.
One of the most beautiful spots on the planet when you get right down to it.
Absolutely. In fact, people call it the Galapagos of North America, and it's an incredible jewel of a place, and one of my favorite things about the district in Santa Barbara County.
So, are you from the Central Coast, or what is your first memory, or maybe fondest memory of the Central Coast?
I grew up in Lompoc originally and then moved to Santa Barbara, and one of my earliest memories is vacationing with the family, camping on the state beaches along the Gaviota Coast in Santa Barbara County. Wonderful resources there. There's Gaviota State Beach, Refugio State Beach, El Capitan State Beach. They're extremely popular, folks locally and statewide, and they're really gems in the state park system.
So there are people all around the world who know of California as really Hollywood and Los Angeles or San Francisco and the Silicon Valley. The Central Coast, a little bit overlooked sometimes by the rest of the planet, probably shouldn't be. You have a chance here today, right now, to tell people around the world why they should come to the Central Coast. What would you tell them?
Well, I think it is really one of the best parts of the state of California. It combines all the things that everybody would want. We have beautiful, vibrant, exciting cities. We have wide open spaces, hiking in the mountains, vibrant agriculture, tourist attractions that are world renowned. And if you're going to travel to California, you need to make the trek between Los Angeles and San Francisco, and you're straight into coming. You can't get there without coming through the Central Coast, and it's a really great place.
The Central Coast Legislative Caucus was formed this year. Your chair is Dawn Addis from Morro Bay. There are 10 members of your caucus. What are the priorities, or what's the purpose of, and what are the priorities of the Central Coast Legislative Caucus?
Well, the first and most important priority is to really put us on the map and to identify the space and area as a distinct geographic unit that is worthy of attention and resources. So it's really wonderful to have the collaboration with all of the legislators, essentially from northern Los Angeles County, Ventura County, all the way up, into to San Benito County, and that's a lot of different folks representing the Central Coast. So that provides a little bit more weight when it comes to the conversations about resource allocation around the state. We want to make sure that our constituents and the residents of the Central Coast are part of the conversation about funding and resources. And so that's the point, is we're going to gather together, have a caucus that's identifiable, that over time our colleagues in other parts of the state recognize as a viable, geographic, distinct entity that needs respect and attention. And we've had nothing but great response from colleagues to date. They are excited about the fact that we exist and want to participate and help us as best we can.
One last quick question for you. One of the members of your caucus is the new speaker, Robert Rivas. That's got to help a little bit to have the boss be a part of your group.
Yeah, I think that's really fabulous. And it's, Robert is a wonderful leader. We are really excited about having Assemblymember Rivas, Speaker Rivas, as a part of the coalition and the caucus. And I think, there's only great things to look forward to as we get more organized and have more presence in the legislature as time goes on.
When Dawn caught up with Steve Bennett, he found out the Assemblymember was 9 years old when he first saw the Pacific Ocean.
Mr. Bennett, tell me, what part of the Central Coast is District 38?
District 38 goes from Port Hueneme in Ventura County all the way north through Oxnard, Ventura, the unincorporated area, all the way up to the boundary of Santa Barbara County.
What's your favorite part of the Central Coast?
Oh, I think the river mouth of Ventura River, how that comes down there. You still have a natural ecosystem there. We've done a lot to try to keep it as natural as possible. We've done beach erosion. We've done managed retreat to deal with some of the beach erosion issues, et cetera. But it's a great spot.
Favorite memory first memory, I should say, of the Central Coast? Were you born and raised out that way?
No, I was born and raised in Indianapolis. In 1959, I had never seen the ocean. I was 9 years old, and we took the train all the way out to California, and then we rode down the coast, and so I saw from the 101 the ocean for the first time, and so that was between Santa Barbara and Ventura County, and it's burned in my memories. That's what the ocean looks like.
So there's wonderful things about the Central Coast, all from the agriculture to the coastal views. If you only could tell people one thing about the Central Coast, is there something you would tell them?
I would tell them this. There are very few places in the world that have a Mediterranean climate, a coastal Mediterranean climate. And this is one of those places, and that's what makes it so precious and so important that we protect it. But it's also because a Mediterranean climate, in my opinion, is the best place to live in the world. It's so gentle and easy on you. And then some Mediterranean climates have more difficult storms and all that than we have here, but we're not fighting hurricanes and those kinds of things. So I think it's a place that I can't imagine living anyplace else but Ventura, Santa Barbara coast.
You are part of the CCLC, the Central Coast Legislative Caucus, newly formed this past year. Why is a caucus important, and what do you hope the priorities of your caucus will be?
Well, it's important because, we're sandwiched between two big metropolitan areas, the Los Angeles area and the Bay Area. And so those people have common interest. And so those of us on the Central Coast need to link together and pull our efforts together to try to make sure that the voice of the Central Coast is heard appropriately in the legislature. And then the two things that I think are most important for the Central Coast, one is, what are we going to do about sea level rise and its impact on the coast, and the other is this whole development of offshore wind turbines, and how can we make sure those are real positive developments for people on the coast in terms of good jobs, the quality of life continues to be high, and it doesn't have a negative impact, but rather a positive impact on our quality of life as we develop offshore wind energy, which is a must for us if we're going to address the issues of climate change that are looming in front of us.
Last question. The new Speaker of the Assembly is from the Central Coast. Does that help? Is that nice? Any thoughts as to whether or not having the Speaker as part of this new caucus will make a will be beneficial?
I think it certainly has a significant benefit in that you have somebody that really understands the issue. So you don't have to go through the added point of trying to explain what's going on in the Central Coast. So I'm really happy about it. I'm really looking forward to his leadership. And I think it helps everybody in the Central Coast and therefore helps everybody in California because it's an essential link between the two major metropolitan areas.
Thanks to all the members for joining us on Look West. I'm Emily Weber. Thanks to all of you for listening. Watch for a new episode of Look West on the third Thursday of every month.
The Look West podcast is produced by California Assembly Democrats. When you think of Californian politics, remember to look west.